Hello there, and welcome back to the Film Score Podcast. Today, my guest is Tom Schraeder. Those longtime careful readers of you might recognize Tom from when I premiered a track of his from his feature score for Hurt. Tom's done a number of other scores, particularly in the horror genre, which coincidentally is a genre of film that for a long time he had a hesitancy towards, and film scoring has forced him to reckon with and, to the extent possible, overcome that hesitancy. Tom's also had a long career as a folk musician with extensive touring, which in my view is highlighted by playing at Lollapalooza several years back. Today, Tom and I don't particularly focus on any single score, and instead use some of his past experiences, past scores, as jumping off points to build and create a conversation. So it's quite a wide-ranging one with respect to film and music. And it was also the first in-person interview I've done. I think this is interview 75, maybe? And 74 of those have all been virtual. If I had my way, this is how they would all be. Someone coming to my house so I can still sit around drinking coffee, exceptionally easy on my life. With that being the first one, the setup was a bit ad hoc. So the sound might be a bit different, even on my voice. We use different microphones, different room, different treatment. If this becomes more common, then I'll have more impetus to experiment with how things work. Of course, you can find out more about Tom on his social media, on his website. You can do the same for me. Be a busy month, a lot of cool stuff coming out. Keep those ears open, but until then, sit back and enjoy. Tom, thanks so much for joining me today in person. How have you been?
Very well. Happy to be here. Happy to be in Chicago.
It's funny, we talked about doing this because you're originally from Chicago. We talked about doing something in person like 3 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
So it's funny finally having it actually happen.
Absolutely. I've been looking forward to it, and happy to have you in Chicago and as a neighbor. Well, when I'm in town now, I guess, but
Yeah.
it still feels like my city, at heart. But I remember us talking about different restaurants and all that. Just like that was one of my favorite things when I was bartending in Chicago, was when someone just moved there or was visiting, is I would just give all my favorite places, just a list way too long.
Honestly, because you sent me one of those, and it was like, especially because I was so new to the city, it was really nice. The downside being, of course, that was maybe it was like right in the midst of COVID, so
Yeah.
I had this list of bars and restaurants and venues, and I couldn't really go to any of them. But
it just teased you a bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So it's at least been nice to have in my back pocket for times like now.
Yeah.
I think that conversation came out maybe from The Dark and the Wicked. And it's funny, we were talking earlier, and you told me that up until recently, like, you didn't even like horror movies. Or maybe not didn't like, but like found difficult to watch.
Very difficult, yeah.
And that's, I find so surprising, because your scoring work sits basically in the horror thriller genre.
Yes.
So when the first horror film came through for you to score, like, what was your reaction to that? Or was there like a hesitancy of, am I even the right guy for this?
Absolutely. Well, it was fun in probably around 2010. I got asked to kind of dabble in a short film, and it was a horror film. It was to compose it, and that was really nice. It was the first time I had seen Eraserhead, and I was able to kind of set aside my own anxieties from watching the genre and just be like, this is good filmmaking. This is, having a different canvas to paint. And so I enjoyed that. But then it wasn't until years later when I met Sonny Molly, and he asked me to actually write an original song for a film he was working on. I did that. And then he asked me if I had 10 minutes of score, for a horror film. And I'm like, well, I guess I've done that, And so I just came up with something, sent it to him. He liked it. Then he said, you want 20 minutes? He liked that. And then that's how, fast forward to him introduced me to Brian Bertino at Brian's farm on set of Dark and the Wicked. So it was really something kind of a crash course in horror. Put my own anxieties with the genre just because that was the only reason. My anxiety was far too great to ever make it through. For a while, I couldn't even make it through Wizard of Oz because I was so afraid of the flying monkeys, And now I'm working with truly two pioneers, or just really very revered horror legends, And so I would ask them many questions, which films to watch, and yeah, like I said, it was a crash course, and now I love the genre. I still have to watch my anxieties, but the genre's been so kind to me, and I love it.
What were some of those recommended, we'll call them like entry-level horror movies that eased you into the genre a bit?
Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There was one just recently that I'm sorry, I can't think of the one just recently that I watched that I had to watch with the lights on. But then I went also, I mean, it was like during the day, I had every light on. My wife was at work and I was just freaking out at like 2 p.m. Oh, it was The Conjuring. It was The Conjuring.
I mean, yeah, to be fair, there are like,
yeah.
I think in horror, you can have like cheap jump scares and they're coming, but like the shock of it and that stinger is enough to still make you jump.
Yeah.
But The Conjuring, or I'm thinking of Insidious, but like I think The Conjuring is the same way, especially that first one where there's like a lot of really good earned scares in there, like not just and I don't even want to use cheap because like I think that's not fair, but like the more
right.
kind of obvious used ones.
Yeah. It definitely inspired me, and that's what's nice. Now I can watch a horror film and I'm taking notes. I'm actually taking notes down to the minute of the film, like, oh, so this is why this was here, And it's nice. I have I love Hitchcock now, but then even movies slightly outside of the genre, like Old Boy, just slightly more intense films than John Hughes movies, which I love and have grown up just appreciating. Now going into this and feeling like I'm getting an education, rewatching all of Sonny's movie or Brian Bertino's films, people who I greatly respect, and understanding the lyrical prose within both of their work is really nice too, and that kind of matches my background of a songwriting background. I also come from screenwriting, as a kid, I was trying to pursue film, a career, and I was always auditioning from the age of 3, doing film and theater, and always trying to write a screenplay. Did a couple classes even in college. So anyways, it's nice to now be in film and mixing my love for music and what I originally thought I was going into,
So having that interest in film from obviously like a very young age, was there a point where you realized, oh, as a singer-songwriter instead, that provides me a different avenue to get into film?
It was funny. I actually really gave up the idea of making it in film. Something happened in my early 20s where I was just saying I should put all of my eggs in this basket. And it was going all in on music. So I started a tour, became a recording artist, and I fell in love with the studio. But I was always, looking back though, I was always trying to make cinematic music. I had a very large ensemble of a band at one point. We played Lollapalooza and had like I think 14 people on that stage at once, and it was so fun to try to make the largest sound possible over what would have been traditional songwriting. I think that still kind of prepared me, both the chunks from like my early childhood trying to pursue film and then doing the band stuff. It really, all of it kind of came together once I was given this medium of film to say, go ahead, have fun with it,
And that's one of the interesting things that I've seen in your film music is, like you talked about, first getting into it by just recording an original song, but then you hear your scores for Hurt or The Dark and the Wicked, and those also have like original songs by you in them that often fall into, and I'm always wary of genre tags because I think increasingly as music moves forward, those traditional tags kind of fall by the wayside. Like you see the mixing of genres or the lowering of those walls between them
Yeah.
further and further. But I think maybe from like a high level saying, they kind of fall into a kind of a folky countryish sound.
Yeah.
And it's interesting hearing that against this chaotic, like grating horror music as well. So
Yes.
so when it comes to those songs, how are you determining the palette for the songs themselves compared to the score?
It's a great question because I feel like every movie, it depends really, right? On I love reading the script. As I mentioned earlier, I've always been obsessed with script. So I like to read the script, digest it, and almost find what feel like lyrics in the script and let the script write the song. As far as, I'll read it a few times, and if there's a feeling or if I'm really obsessed with one character, and then I'll go pick up the guitar and see what can come from the inspiration within that bubble, that small window of just really being inspired from it, and what comes out. For Dark and the Wicked, it really wrote itself because Brian had such, he's a huge music fan. And we would spend hours on the phone talking about music, and the artist he likes. And so then I would just keep listening to various artists from a genre, a time period, and blending all of those. It just kind of, I feel like what's beautiful about songwriting and music is it just ends up writing itself. And I try to get out of its way. And then a lot of edits and revisions and saying what are the best verses and paring it down. That's where the work comes in, but start a song out with like 13 verses and then just say, is there one verse good enough here? And where it's the theme. But so I like to start with the original song, and usually from that, I'll end up working my way into the themes for the score cues.
Okay, interesting. And do you think there's a different expressiveness between one of these songs and what you're able to do on like more traditional score music instead?
What's funny is I mentioned to you earlier, I'm always suffering with imposter syndrome, and listening to your podcast, it's given me a lot of confidence that so many composers deal with this. One of the things that has given me confidence, in addition to your podcast, is the fact that I have almost 30 records that I wrote prior to film scoring. So every time I get nervous, I'm just like, wait a minute. All I have to do is not sing the melody I'm hearing. I can just give it to the instrument and build it from there and harmonize in the same ways as I would with a vocal. So it really comes from the same spot. In some ways, I feel like it's a bit easier until the pitcher gets involved. But as far as just writing the theme, but then I always say, write it and let the pitcher tell you it's wrong, because it's easier for me once I put the music up against the pitcher to see when it's wrong than when it's right. Even you can just tell when it's not working, and you have to go back to the workshop. And
It sounds like you're actually having a lot of experiences where you're starting on the music quite early, like talking about
Yes.
reading through the scripts, or like you just said, creating some of the music and then seeing the film and seeing how they line up.
Yeah.
Has
Yeah,
that been your
absolutely.
typical experience so far?
Absolutely. I like to provide the directors with glimpses of what the score can be from the beginning, whether it's tone.
Mm.
The idea of the musical palette is something I really love doing. And I like to get that done very early, maybe even sometimes before the themes. But every movie, I guess, it's different what comes out first, but the process of starting with the script, if I'm lucky enough, is the way I like to do it. Hear what the director doesn't like. That's
Mm.
equally as important, if not more important as well, is hearing this is not the direction, because now we're starting to get walls and we can start narrowing it down the direction here, especially for the scores that I like to create where I'm really trying to go completely out of the box and almost disrupt the listener's mood rather than giving them something. I say I try to make music for the chest rather than the ears,
Oh, okay.
specifically in this genre.
I mean, and is there ever a pushback to that from the director? Because you often hear different like theories or views on film music, and I think one that's kind of been popularized is like a good score is one that you don't hear. And yes, sometimes I think that's right. A lot of times I strongly disagree with that, but obviously it's always up to the filmmaker, the producers, whomever. So have you had those instances where you want to disrupt the listener, the viewer, and the director is like, no, we're not doing that?
Luckily, not yet. I did another film called Beast Mode, and that was one where I was fully in every film. What's really nice is I'm creating for the director. I'm not creating for my own release. That film was interesting because it was the first time he wanted it to be very a nod to the 80s. So I wasn't able to disrupt. It was just very go into the sounds, and that was a great challenge that I'm happy to have been a part of. But then with the other films, like you mentioned, Hurt and Dark and the Wicked, the idea of specifically Dark and the Wicked, when I went to the farm to meet Brian, we hit it off immediately because we were coming at this point of view of disrupting,
Hmm.
really giving something that specifically how I presented what I was feeling from the script was something that the listener wouldn't want to hear, but they couldn't leave. Basically, recreate my anxiety, recreate my panic attacks, hit people in a way that the entire time they're listening, they think they need to leave. And then play with tensions and frequencies and release. So it's just this constant wave. But then Brian was able to obviously take that and come up with crazy ideas. He wanted it to feel forever, so he really didn't want synthesizers,
Hmm.
and he wanted it to be very rustic, and he said he wanted it to sound like the piano falling. And I mean, that's just reducing hours and hours and hours of great conversation with him, and it's really just listening to how far they can go. But when I turned that in, I was so nervous. I'm like, I went really far on this one and found various ways to create these drones without using a synthesizer or stock libraries. And so I've become obsessed with recording everything around me at all times. I have this tiny microphone I'm holding
Mm.
it right
Yeah,
now.
I saw that. I was wondering what that was.
Yeah,
My dog tried to eat it earlier.
yeah, it looks fun, and I bring it with me everywhere. And if I hear something that gets my anxiety going, I'm like, "Thank you." Now, so in many ways, horror has helped my own issues with anxiety, and I'll record it. And now I'm like, "Thank you for the universe sending me this crazy drone." And
On that note, are there any sounds you've heard just out in the environment that triggered your anxiety that come to mind?
oh, definitely, yes, all the time. I was just in Europe and in London, and the train. It was just
Hmm.
this wild sound, and I have it on my phone. It was just, I'm like, this actually sounds like a beautiful horror score. Like this drone that is creeping in and getting larger and larger, and it's overwhelming. And luckily now, instead of me, covering my ears, I'm taking it in like a symphony. I'm like, this is gorgeous, and just hoping no one around me starts talking so I can have this piece of beautifully recorded ambience. But earlier I heard your dog Bowie playing with the squeaking, and I'm like, this would be a beautiful piece, and so my mind is always on, always collecting the sound, and it's really made life so much more fun. Life is the studio in many ways now.
That's awesome. And after this, we can see if we can recreate the squeaks. Maybe get a couple dog growls as well.
Absolutely.
But it's interesting you say that, because I was reading this was a while ago now, an interview with Charlie Clouser, who in Nine Inch Nails scored all the Saw films, among other things, and he's someone that has been doing the same thing since, I don't know, maybe the early 80s, maybe even longer, and has this kind of just repertoire of sounds he's found in the wild. And there was one specifically where it was also the sound of the subway, I want to say in New York, that he captured in, like, let's say 1986, and sat on it, and like 20 years later found a use for it. And so I think it's
beautiful. Yes.
I think it's so interesting having that mindset or that ear of hearing things in the wild. And I use the wild loosely, but hearing things just around you and listening for them. And it's not like a bird song where it's something traditionally beautiful, but seeing some sort of like beauty in it, or use from it, or that gets your mind interested. Because I think it's so easy for us to instead tune out what's going on. And like so often now, you walk around or you see people walking around, they've got headphones in, and all of that sound is completely lost instead.
Absolutely. It's really made me almost more present with life, because I'm always listening, and I'm not listening to block out. I'm listening to capture. And I feel like with film scoring for me, and obviously everyone has their own process. That's been really nice hearing on your podcast. For me, I call it painting. What I love to do is capture all these sounds, record all the themes with incredible musicians, asking them to do crazy techniques on their instruments. And then I love to go in with the lock picture and just go to town now. So I've spent from the screenplay on, all of those months. Then I actually, like I said, I went on set for Dark and the Wicked. So I was able to hear the sound of the grounds and understand this massive windmill, the goats, the bottles, all of these things were really a part of the farm. And to hear just how the wind worked out there, finding this balance of like wood and metal. And I had a really beautiful different colors to start painting the film with. Once I got the picture, I just knew where to go and take all of this, like maybe 150 minutes worth of random noises and just paint. And then, like I said, right, when I find out, the way I know it's right is I forget that it's my work. I'm just like, oh, this feels like it's always existed, that these are the right colors to paint this with.
Interesting. And I do like that idea of especially being on the grounds, on set, whatever you want to call it, because I think it's easy to forget, or maybe you don't realize it in the first place as the viewer, that a lot of the sound that you're hearing in a film is not the ambient sound that's recorded while they were shooting. So much of it is removed and then put back in. So I think when you have those influences from the landscape themselves, it adds maybe a bit more authenticity to the music, rather than it being completely disconnected from the reality that you're viewing.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's actually the word that I always stick with me, is this feeling authentic right now. And if it's not, I've just learned that from my songwriting days, all the days that I was trying to write something, maybe because I was into a genre, but it wasn't me. Looking back, my favorite pieces were the ones that were just authentic. So then starting a film career 15 years into this other career, I was able to say, what didn't I like about that? Or what have I learned? And I said, it's got to come from an authentic place. So I'll decline a project, or specifically if I feel I'm not bringing an authentic approach to this, there's someone who can bring that authentic side of themselves and add their own personality to it. That would make a picture much greater. So you just can't fake it.
And that's something that I was getting at a little bit earlier as well, talking about being able to express yourself in between song versus score. But that kind of adds a different wrinkle, or looks at it from a different perspective, is that sense of authenticity, or bringing some of Tom into the music. Because obviously, when you're doing a score, it's not for yourself, it's for the director, for the picture. So I think it could be easy to say it's a job, it's a craft, but it sounds like while that might be the case, you're still able to channel some of yourself. Or if you're not able to, then maybe someone else is right for it instead.
Absolutely. You owe it to the entire massive cast and crew. It's such a production. And that's what I love about film. It's a collaboration at its finest. There's always someone there who can do something better than you. So it's like, give your strengths, be open about your weaknesses, and understand this is all egoless. This is all about bringing the best vision together. It's challenging. There's so many songs and cues and scores, that just end up on the floor, like any album that I did, that just don't fit with it in the end. But it's about being honest to the greater vision. And I love that, coming from being a songwriter where I was just trying to fulfill my own wishes and artistic ego or whatever, and then going in and just saying, like, this is someone else's, but how do I find my voice in here through their vision? Because of that, I've been really lucky, though, working with directors who have great leadership and also saying, like, go do what you do.
I do love that idea of there's a reason that the filmmakers, that the director picked you to do this project, because they trust you. And this is something you don't know yet, because it's, as of our conversation, not out, but I was talking with Jerskin Fendricks about his score for Poor Things, and that was something he mentioned over and over, of like, yeah, I just did a bunch of weird music and asked Yorgos Lanthimos, like, am I going too far? And he was like, no, just keep going, keep pushing it, because that's why you're on this. Like, if I wanted someone that wasn't going to push it, I'd have hired someone else instead. I think with a lot of conversations, hearing about temp music, temp love, that there's a constraint on composers, but it's really refreshing hearing so often that sometimes the reality is completely different. That really, you've got some initial conversations about where it's going to go. You've got the script to look at that is inherently going to not necessarily constrain you, but sort of help guide where the music goes. And then beyond that, there's a trust in you, there's an agency, and you have to, or you should be trusting that and be going with your gut.
Absolutely. And I've been very blessed with that. I think it would be I mean, everything, every project is so different. So I'm sure the time will come where a director is like, no, this is exactly what it is. And that will be, I accept that too, if I believe in the project. I say to the directors, it's like, I want to know what's in your mind. And I want you to call me at 2 a.m. when you get an idea. We're partners here. If you want to just talk on the phone for hours, let's do it. Let's hang out. Let's whatever. Let me understand the nuances that you're hearing, because I want to recreate that. And that's what really makes it a lot of fun here, And with Dark and the Wicked, it was interesting because I wanted to make, it's a really beautiful picture. And in many ways, I felt like it was a drama. The first thing I said to Brian was, I don't want to do another horror. I don't think that this is just a horror score. we could go the traditional horror score route, but I think it should be very beautiful. And then with parts of it, like I was saying, I wanted to disrupt that beauty. In many ways, I wanted it to be kind of a rustic avant-garde. And I started to listen to a lot of avant-garde jazz. And one artist who I got on the score was a dear friend and mentor who recently just passed, sadly, Mars Williams. And we got together. I went and saw him perform, and he was playing with toys and all these gadgets, and he was just making the instrument speak in a different way. The sax, the flute. He had it was like a pool noodle. It was, and these children's toys, and it was just so fascinating that I knew then. I said, I have this, basically all these colors, and I knew that I needed his voice to fulfill those. And we got together and just spent hours coming up with crazy, crazy tones, long drones from the sax, and different ideas with cymbals and vibraphones and harpsichords, and just playing with toys and recording hours worth of noise. And that's where I understood what I needed to do. It was going to be like a dramatic horror film backed by almost rustic avant-garde folk jazz, with classical, obviously, with all the strings. And that's how he ended up introducing me to Nels Cline from Wilco. And I knew I've been a longtime fan of both of their work. And I knew that was the voice, that the score wouldn't be done if I couldn't get their voices on this. And somehow they said, okay. And they did it, so.
Talking about working with Mars Williams and on a recent song that you released for, what's the movie called? Eye Catchers?
Yeah.
And so I saw that one of the individuals working on that, I think Ari Levy, had
Yes.
also recently passed.
Right.
And
yes, heartbreaking.
Yeah, but at the same time is like having the opportunity to work with them to create music that's recorded, that's out there, that's working on or supporting or supplementing an even larger artistic project. Like, does it also make you feel like that kind of memorializes them as well?
Absolutely. And with Ari, we had spent many years playing, and then with adulthood, you just end up moving to different cities. You don't get to play as often, and it was very special. I was in town, and he had just moved back to Chicago, and I said, I have a couple films, I'm working on, and we were able to play again. Ari and Stephanie Lee, who's an amazing violinist. These are the people who I grew up playing with. So to be able to now be adults and to be able to talk about, they were talking about their children, I was sharing stories about my wife, having dinner, and then like, oh yeah, let's also go do this fun thing as well. But we're having so much fun talking about life and catching up. It was such a beautiful, beautiful moment. And it was difficult. A feature I'm working on right now, Ari did all the strings on that as well, Ari and Stephanie. And it was very difficult to go in and start painting while hearing his laughter and all that. But then when the piece is done, taking my personal, love out, hearing it, being able to celebrate that, it's very beautiful to have that memory, and now I can remember how joyous it was to say, like, do whatever you want. I want your voice on this, and to hear, how the things he came up with. And Mars was the same thing, just I went back and listened to the score for the first time in like 3 years, and to just hear Mars's voice all over that. And a few weeks back, Mars and I hung out, and we were able to just talk about that, and we got nominated, for a couple of awards, and we were able to watch the ceremony together. We had so many moments from Dark and the Wicked, and anyways, it's a beautiful thing that it captures the thing we both love doing most. So yeah, I hold it dear, and It doesn't make it easier, though, to be honest.
Sure.
Just
Yeah.
to be honest, it's still two people I love so much, and I know there was a lifetime ahead of us of more films.
Yeah, and that, I don't know, that's something it's just so difficult, but it's nice that you kind of have their voices figuratively,
Yeah.
literally sort of immortalized in this and these projects you're able to work on.
Absolutely. And it was funny actually, and they were both incredible sense of humor. So while I talk about obviously the sadness that comes with our life and mortality, it's like, gosh, I had so much joy doing both of those. And when I was just talking to Mars a few weeks back, he was showing me things he's working on. I was showing him, and at that time, something came out of the scariest films of all time. It was like 250 people, or 250 films were put up on this scientific study in
Yeah.
the UK. And they were checking heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, everything. And Dark and the Wicked ended up ranking number 14 scientifically of scariest films of all time. And so I showed Mars, I'm like, we did it. We did it, and we were both cracking up because the whole time we're like, that's going to get up. It's like when you're working in horror, it's the beauty comes in
Yeah.
the fright and the weirdness. And so, yeah, a lot of celebrations come with it,
I mean, and is that, because I think Sinister was number one on that list.
Yeah, I think it was Sinister or Saw, or not Saw. Well, yeah, Sinister got it right,
Yeah.
and Host was high up there as well, and incredible like modern films
Yeah.
made the list. I was super happy to see.
Is that list like something that just inherently terrifies you of I already like have my issues with watching horror. Here are the absolute like worst things for me possible.
Absolutely. There's one side where I'm like, okay, so now we have the films I should not watch, but then also I'm like, I have to. This if I want to keep getting better, I need to get my notebook out and watch these. But that list I loved it because when I sought out to do specifically Dark and the Wicked, I was really obsessed with how do humans react to sound? What do we like? What don't we like? What frequencies do we find unsettling? Those were the guidelines that I set for myself. Was, okay, this is a tough scene, so now I'm going to leave this frequency out, or and I just had it. I really studied that. So when the actual scientific proof came out, I'm like, oh, I did my job. I did it. Like,
now, I don't want to kick the anxiety or the imposter syndrome back up, but seeing, the scientific success of the scariness, does that then like create a higher bar for you as you go like, oh, okay, The Dark and the Wicked overall was that successful from that perspective? Am I going to be able to keep that up in each other film that I do, at least where it calls for it?
Where it calls for it, yeah. The film I'm finishing right now that I just mentioned, it's a heavy, heavy film, and the films that allow me to take that on, I love it. The film after that I can't really talk about, but it's gonna go a totally different direction. And again, I want to incorporate that at all times. The idea, specifically with horror, but I won't be using, say, like the devil chord or things like that. I want to kind of break some maybe musical tropes that I've been enjoying. But the next one, I feel like it's almost Dark and the Wicked on steroids. It's very unsettling. The whole movie, I just wanted to just hurt the listener, and that sounds really cruel, doesn't it? I don't mean it as cruel. I guess I do, but it's also something about the genre. I'm a lot of times I did listen to you mentioned him earlier, Charlie Clouser.
Yeah.
Your podcast with him, and I feel like we came from similar places where it's like some movies are. You're writing for the character, and even some scenes, breaking down in the scenes. Some are for the character, some are for the viewer, and you have to that balance. In this movie, I went heavily, the one coming out, heavily from the viewer's experience, using tones that represent the characters, but really what is the viewer's experience here? So I'm excited for when that comes out. I'll send it your way.
All right, sounds good. And how are you determining whether something should be from the character for the viewer or a different perspective entirely?
I think what the scene calls for and what I feel the scene needs while watching it, as far as if the performance is as incredible as Marin and Michael Abbott Jr.'s, the actors in Dark and the Wicked. And I mean, I've been really blessed with, I think the actors and the performances across the board have been really incredible. And a lot of the times I try to back off of it and let them take it. But then when you have to like step in, there's a hit, there's a jump, there's things like that. That's when I know we're going for the listener or the viewer. So it's again that idea of playing with release and tension and keeping the listener engaged, but also like, okay, you know what, I've been really quiet. There's nothing here. I want them to, even the director and producer, to think I'm working here. So I'll put in something really small just to bring the listener back. So I'll take on the listener's point of view. But also, it's about, I've been blessed with working with incredible sound designers, sound mixers, and I try to provide more for the director, the producers to have fun with. Provide them with more than it's probably even wanted, and I always say, move what you want. You can take it out, even if it's my favorite scene. This is your movie, so for a 90-minute film, I may provide them 90 minutes worth of music, if that's what they're okay with. I'm sure there's some directors that are like, just give us 40. Come on, guy, But I like the idea of complete artistic freedom and give them the paint and the tools and materials that I had and let them say what works in their vision.
And going back a little bit, you mentioned working with sound designers, sound mixers. I know Joe Stockton, you work with him all the time. Mixing and maybe sound design as well. And I know Joe, so I know he does like a lot of different things, wears a bunch of different hats.
Yes.
But looking at a little bit more broadly, like on these scores, it's not, at least from as far as I know, it's not like you're working with big orchestras. You're doing a lot of the playing yourself, or you're bringing in these other musicians that that are playing one or a couple of instruments too. And so it keeps it a bit smaller, more intimate, and you end up working with a lot of the same people over and over. So is having that sort of consistency and collaboration and working relationships as that moves on, does that make it easier for you to create these scores, and having that trust in your musicians as well increase the quality, the breadth, the scope of what you're able to make?
Absolutely. And so Sonny Malhi, I think Joe and him worked on Family Blood for the first one, I believe. I may be wrong, but they go far back. And that was the song that I sent the original song for,
Okay.
And then Hurt, I co-composed with CJ Johnson, and then Joe mixed that. Then Dark and the Wicked, Joe mixed that. So it's this ongoing relationship, and now Joe is not only mixing this next film, but he's stepping in the composer chair too. It's been this ongoing relationship, and eye catcher as well.
Yeah.
That I'm really comfortable having Joe mix, because that's how I was saying with the collaboration. There's always someone who's better at something than you. So I just give Joe this madness, this absolute madness, and say, is this okay? And he's like, I got it. And it comes back and it sounds beautiful. He's just truly, I call him the wizard. And it's such a joy working with him and hearing what he can come up with, because he understands now. When I send him 70 or 80 tracks, and one of the tracks is just a dog toy. He understands what to do now with that, So yeah, this is my first time co-composing again, and it's nice to do that. And Joe's also edited the film, so like you said, he wears
Yeah.
many hats. It's really nice. Gives me such confidence every movie, knowing I'm like, at least Joe can fix this before the director even gets to it, you know?
And I love that because it also goes back to what we were talking about earlier of like the filmmakers giving you as the composer agency and trust, and then you take that same agency and trust and are putting it in the people that you're working with. Because I think
Absolutely.
I'm sure there are plenty of situations where the film's composer wants something done a particular way, and that's how the violinist is going to play, and that's it.
Right.
But here it sounds like there's the latitude, the agency, and that kind of trust creates something even better.
Absolutely. And that goes along with the musicians who, I'm so blessed to work with. As I mentioned, with like a long career of touring and recording, I've just worked with hundreds of amazing musicians, and each one have their own sound and voice. So my goal is to do throughout my career from here on too, is to keep it where it's like once I get the pleasure of working with an artist, say, here's the theme, go for it. This is what's written. Now have fun. Do what you feel like. How haven't you used your instrument? Now, how can we make your instrument unique to you? And how can we, if it's a cello, just all the various extended bowing techniques, or can we put an ebow? I don't prepared piano or things like that. I think really asking musicians to utilize their own voice, bring out that inner child. It's so easy to just, as we get older, to just come in, try to save money, which is good,
Yeah.
but also, the luxury of doing independent filmmaking. I'm not renting out massive studios where a lot of it I can bring my, setup and just let them have fun again. And that's what I really like from every musician. And I'd like to continue using all the bandmates I've had over the years, for whichever film calls for their voice. But then also look up the legends who who I mentioned earlier, and reach out and just see if they'd be interested in doing a project, and let's see them become a kid again. I guess personally what I really get out of it is just having fun again with it, especially in all the dread. Yeah.
Do you think that if scoring for film reaches the point where you're not having fun, where the people that you're bringing on to collaborate with you aren't having fun, is that kind of the point where you take a step back and go, is this what I want to keep doing?
Well, I truly just hope it never gets there, because it's such a dream.
Yeah.
Every film. I would like to think of myself as finding a way to have fun and connect with the music. Sure, there are a lot of moments in every film where I'm like, this isn't fun. Right now, I'm
Sure.
talking about the fun parts, but there's many times like I'm not built for this. I'm a folk singer. What am I doing here? But I find a way to reconnect with it, and it always comes around. And I don't know if there's anything as gratifying as seeing the work come together and to fulfill someone else's vision. That's the other thing, it's like that token at the end. With all of my records, I'm always still thinking like, oh, I should have redone those vocals. I should have added this. Why did I do this? But when you're catering to someone else's vision, it's a lot easier to just hand it off and then see like, you're happy with it. I did my job.
Yeah.
And then I get to just sit there and enjoy it and think of it as a third party. And I still can't do that with my records, but with watching any of the films I've worked on, I watch it like I'm a kid. Just like, wow, I can't even believe they made it sound that good.
That's awesome. So I think we're running maybe near the end at this point. I did want to take like a drastic hard detour here. I think your wife is in like the fashion industry, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
something that I've been a little interested in lately is the music for fashion shows as well. So like Cliff Martinez and Nicholas Winding Refn did Touch of Crude for Prada. The electronic artist Sebastian has apparently been doing music for Yves Saint Laurent like for years, and he just released a compilation that's like 4 hours long of all of his music. So it does kind of fall into this broad umbrella of music for somebody else, music for media. Is that something that, given your connection to that, that's ever kind of crossed your mind or your path?
I would definitely be down for it. Georgia is, she works for Ford Models, and she runs the digital division and has an incredible amount of creators she works with. I went to Fashion Week this year in Milan and Paris, and it's been nice to check out this other world. I would love to get into it. Right now, I think, I'm on the side, I'm doing songwriting with other artists as well. So I'm always down for a challenge. If something makes me feel a little awkward, I'm like, let's dive into this. So, if Prada comes asking, absolutely. And there's a great Rolodex of musicians who will make me sound decent. And, but they haven't come calling yet, but I'm ready. I'm ready.
Awesome. Yeah. Hey, well, Tom, it was great chatting to you.
Thank you.
Face to face, the first time. So we got over the tech issues and everything else, but like it was really awesome having you come down, sitting in my basement with my dog on the couch behind us, hopefully not making too much noise.
Make some more. Let's record it. Thank you. It was a great time, and I love the podcast. Thank you for doing it.
Hey, I appreciate it. That means a lot.